Hello guys. So in this video, we'll be discussing the topic of frequency distribution. So here's the agenda of discussion. So the topics that we'll be discussing in this video are frequency distributions. Okay. And so we'll discuss what is a frequency distribution? What is a frequency distribution? And the different types, the types of frequency distributions, right? Now, we have discussed earlier that so there are different ways of collecting data from a population, right? Because it might not always be possible for us to collect data from every single individual of the population, right? Which is why we need to draw samples from a population, and then we choose to study the sample, which we believe to somewhat represent the characteristic of the population, right? And so typically the samples are drawn in a random way. Now, once we have collected our data using, there are several sampling techniques that we discussed earlier. So once the data is collected, we need to organize the data and eventually to summarize the data, right? Because data collected in its raw form is not interpretable in a significant way, right? So looking at the raw data, you won't be able to make any any analysis unless you represent the data in a proper way, right? So we have to organize the data before we can carry out some analysis on the data. And frequency distribution is a very nice way of organizing the data that we collect, okay? So let's start with an example. Suppose that will be your example one, okay? Suppose we decide to collect the data of the number of people with different hair colors. So we collect the data of the hair color of people in a group, okay? So collect data on the hair color of individuals in a group, okay? So if we do that, we might get a data set like this. So let's say blonde. So I'll just write in abbreviated form. Then black, let's say black. Then brown. Then black. Then blonde, brown, black, blonde, blonde, and then let's say black, brown, brown, blonde, and black, okay? So let's say we have a data set like this. Now, looking at this data set in its raw form doesn't give you much information about the pattern or trend in the data, right? So a better way would be to organize the data in the form of a table, right? Where we simply list the different classes of observations, which are in this case the different categories, and the corresponding frequency, like how many instances of each category occurred in the sample that we collected, right? So what we could do instead is to form a table like this, where we simply list the different classes and how many times each class occurred in the sample, right? So the frequency of each class, right? So we show the classes and the corresponding frequency. So we have three different classes in this case. So we have the class of the blonde hair, and then the black hair and the brown hair people, right? And so then we simply list the frequency of each class in the sample. So let's count the frequency of the blonde hair, people with blonde hair. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So the frequency of blonde is 5. Then the frequency of black is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And the frequency of brown would be 1, 2, and 3, right? So brown is 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have total 15 observations. We have 5 blonde-haired people, 6 black-haired people, and 4 brown-haired people. So this is what we call a frequency distribution of the collected data, right? And so looking at this table, you get a trend. Like you can see the trend of or pattern in the data that you've collected. So what is the typical hair color? Like which of the hair color occurred more frequently? So you really can see that trend in this representation in the form of a frequency distribution, right? And so the above table actually shows the categories or groups and their corresponding frequency of occurrence in the collected data. And these groups are called classes, and the number of occurrences of each class in the data collected is called the frequency of the class, or the class frequency, right? Now, in this particular case, the classes are based on attributes or categorical data, right? So this is an example of a simple, so this is an example. This is an example of a frequency distribution. And to be more precise, it is a simple frequency distribution, right? So this is one of the type of frequency distribution, which is basically what we call a simple frequency distribution. So this is an example of a simple frequency distribution where the classes are attributes or categorical data, right? Now, it could also be the case that the classes are quantitative data or numerical data, right? For a simple frequency distribution, okay? And so let's take an example of that. So let's consider so that was our example 1. Now let's consider that we collect the data of the number of road accidents that occurred in a given city per day over a period of 30 days. Okay. So our example 2 will be the data set that we collect. So example 2 is, let's say, we collect the data of the number of road accidents, right? Occurred in a given city for a period of, let's say, 30 days. Okay. So if we do that, we might end up having a data set like the following. So let's say we have 4, 5, 6, 4, 3, 2, then 1, 2, 1, 5, 4, 4, then 3, 7, 1, 1, 0, 1. Then we have 4, 3, 2, 6, 1, 5, and 2, 2, 1, 0, 3, and 5. Okay. So let's say we have a data set like this. Okay. So this shows the daily number of road accidents that occurred in a given city over a period of 30 days, right? So again, looking at this data set, it's difficult for us to find the trend, right? So it's the data in its raw form, and it doesn't tell you much of an information. So what we could do instead is we could simply sort these values and then so sort in the order of, let's say, ascending magnitude, and then show the corresponding frequency side by side for each value in a frequency table, right? So here again we can simply show the classes and the corresponding frequency. And the classes in this case are basically will be the numeric values, like how many number of road accidents occurred on a given day. And so we have let's see, the values that we have in this data set are, we have 0, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? Right? And so let's say if we, so what we have to do now is we have to list the number of frequency for each class or each value, right? So how many times 0 occurred in the sample? So 0 occurred only twice, right? So the frequency of 0 is 2. Then the frequency of 1 is, let's see, let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? So 1 occurred 7 times. then 2 occurred. Let's count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 times, right? Then 3 occurred 1, 2, 3, and 4 times, right? Then was the frequency of 4. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 4 occurred 5 times. Then the frequency of 5 is 1, 2, 3, and 4. The frequency of 6 is 1, 2, and the frequency of 7 is simply equal to 1, right? So the total frequency is 2 plus 7 is 9, plus 5 is 14, plus 4 is 18, plus 5 is 23, plus 4 is 27, plus 3 is 30. Okay, so now, so we write the total frequency here. So total is equal to is 30, right? And so this is again an example of a simple frequency distribution where we simply list the individual values which constitute the classes in this case and their corresponding frequency in the sample, right? So let's write it down here. So this is also an example of a simple frequency distribution. But in this case, the classes are numeric data, right? But the classes in this case are numeric values, right? Whereas for the previous case, if you go back to the previous example, the classes are attributes or categorical data. Whereas in this case, we have the classes are numerical values or numeric data, okay? Now, so coming back to the different types of frequency distribution. So this is what we call a simple frequency distribution, which is one classification. And the other type, so let's talk about the types of frequency distribution. And here we have, so broadly, we have two types of frequency distribution. One is this simple frequency distribution, where the classes are individual values. Like those values could be either categorical values or qualitative data, or numeric values or quantitative data. So we have simple frequency distribution is one type. And the other type is what we call grouped frequency distribution, okay? So for the case of a grouped frequency distribution, these classes are intervals or ranges, okay, range of values. Okay, and they are typically numerical values or numerical data, right? So we'll actually we'll take an example in the next video of a grouped frequency distribution, and we'll actually discuss in detailed steps how to construct a grouped frequency distribution. So I'll see you guys in the next video.